You can look at 3 points when it comes to AI. You can look at, does it have access to your internal data? Does it have internet access? And does it have access to tools? And if it has all three, it's probably a matter of time until you get breached. Sales, marketing, support tend to be the targets for attack. I think we've seen support get attacked a lot. Things like Zendesk, Jira, etc. We're starting to see sales get targeted more and more, things like Salesforce, etc. It tends to be that attackers kind of pick a spot and then they stay there for a while until it gets secured and then they move on to something new. So I wouldn't be surprised to see things like social media management tools, email marketing tools, that kind of stuff be like further down the line. I like to think of sort of security culture as a bit of a triangle, and I think of it as security on one end, culture on one end, and velocity on the other end. The biggest issue I see is that security people naturally want to draw the needle to security because that's their job. That is why they're paid. But it's not the be all and end all, right? And so I think that it shouldn't be about always pulling it towards security. It should be about balance and getting it where it needs to go, because there's acceptable risk and there's company culture and all of that stuff that you need to factor into.
Hello. Hi, Kane. Welcome to Be Fearless Podcast.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
To all our listeners, if you're listening to this, you likely used or at least heard of Canva. So our guest today is Kane Narraway. He's the head of enterprise security at Canva, who protects all the creative workflows for over 190 million users worldwide. You scale security teams, guided multiple companies over acquisitions, and you've been part of household names such as Atlassian and Shopify. So I'm super excited to have you, Kane, on our show. Maybe we can start off from the beginning. How did you get into cyber, and how did it result in the journey over Canada, New Zealand, UK, and more?
Yeah, great question. I didn't have as much of a beard when I started, I can say that much. So some progress has been made there. I got into security through digital forensics, of all things. Like, I think I grew up in the UK. I sort of went and did a degree for digital forensics, and I kind of got into it because I liked computers and I liked law, and I wanted to find some way to combine them. But I didn't really want to be like a digital privacy lawyer. I wanted to do more computers than law, if that makes sense. And so kind of got into it that way. Like, security wasn't really super interesting to me. It wasn't something I really knew a lot about when I first started. Like, I mostly liked things like network engineering and computers and that kind of stuff, more tangible hardware stuff than software.
Yeah.
And I think from there it just kind of grew and grew and grew. And like you say, I kind of moved around a bit. So Canada, New Zealand, UK, Australia. People keep asking me if I'm collecting like the Five Eyes, collection or something. So ask when I'm going to move to the US. But I think security is cool in that there's so many options. There's so many different little niche areas. There's red team, blue team, government, tech. Hardware security. I met a guy who does cybersecurity for boats, like people's super yachts, like so many weird little niches. And so it's very much more of like a horizontal than a vertical, right? So you can kind of pick where in each of those you want to be.
And you picked where you are today. And but just generally speaking, when you made all of these moves from Canada to New Zealand you started from UK, what was the inspiration behind all these moves? And I'm sure the way you approach security in one country is slightly different versus the other country. Did you see a lot of differences when you were doing security in these countries?
Yeah, a little bit. Like, first question, what kind of inspired me to move? I think it's just sounds corny, but like new experiences, like if you have the opportunity, I often recommend it. UK to Australia was my first move. They're all kind of similar countries. So at least like they're all kind of same language, same relative culture to some degree. I think if you were moving to even somewhere like Germany or Japan, somewhere that has like a bit of a different culture, different compliance requirements and stuff, you might find a bigger jump than any I've done. But especially, I think the key thing you find is that every sort of local environment will have its own laws, its own local compliance, its own little quirks, right? And I think that because security, you do kind of need to know that stuff. You know, if you're hands-on keyboard engineering all the time, you don't have to, but it does help. And so I think understanding some of those more local requirements can definitely help a lot. I think that is something that I love and loathe a little bit because it's always changing. You know, every country has its own little unique differences. And so some things that are the same across all of them, like everybody does SOC 2. That's not country specific. But if you're going to do like HIPAA for healthcare in the US or something, that's going to be very different to, you know, in Australia, we have this sort of like ACSC 8-point cybersecurity thing. So all going to be very different.
And how do you think your background in forensics helped you where you are today?
Yeah, going from forensics to security is very different. I actually think forensics is closer to red teaming than blue teaming, at least if you're doing it in sort of a government law enforcement context, because you are often trying to break into phones, computers, that kind of stuff. And yes, I think today a lot of it is tooling dependent. Like you buy the tools, you connect them up. And yeah, you did have a lot of that. But I think the more interesting stuff was like those edge case scenarios. Like I definitely remember cases where we had like a broken hard drive, or we had a device running some obscure Linux distribution, or I think once I had to image like a 5-inch floppy disk, and this was not back in like the 80s. This was like in like the mid 2000s. So I definitely think it's a case where you have to like be unique with the edge cases, you know?
Yeah. I'm sure all of these experiences at the end, it's gives you a certain edge. Whatever background you're coming from, it's at the end, there's one point of time where you're just like, that's why I did that. So it helps in the long term. But you also held leadership positions in government and multiple tech companies. Did you have a specific framework when you were deciding when to pivot, how to pivot?
Yeah, I think this will largely depend on each person, right? I think for me, I loved doing forensics work. And I think the work I did, like in the government doing forensics, was probably the most interesting work I've done in my entire career. Like there's not many places where you can like do that kind of work, right? But there's very much like a skill ceiling, very much a cap. And I think you get to the point where you've done something long enough and you kind of want to go and learn something more. With forensics, you're very much dependent on the big technology companies, you know, Microsoft, Google, Apple. You're largely looking at what they build and then you're trying to break it. And so often it's a bit of cat and mouse where like they will build a new security control. You have to then go learn about it. You then have to break it. You then have to do something else. It's very reactive. And I think I got to the point where I could kind of see the writing on the wall. Like I've been out of forensics now for about 10 years or so. And back then was the days where they started enforcing encryption and stuff like that. And it was getting harder and harder and harder. And of course, like forensics still exists. There's still people doing this. But I find that more and more it's dependent on you having the password to the device. There's not many of those interesting edge case scenarios that really interested me. So I kind of saw that disappearing and it going more into sort of a big data, you know, like collecting lots of evidence, searching lots of evidence. That's fine, but that's not what I was personally into. So I kind of wanted to do a bit of a change to something a bit more agile, something a bit new, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so it seemed like it was like a perfect timing to move and discover something new and test yourself out in new industries. And right now you're working in such a creative industry. What are sort of unique challenges that you face in this industry versus some others that you worked in?
Yeah, I think the SaaS industry as a whole is all pretty similar. Like if you've worked at one SaaS company, you can probably move to another, and there might be little differences. I think a lot of it is cultural or like velocity or risk acceptance differences. But I think that largely, like the same people are probably going to be hitting you. And so I think that security is, again, it's like a very adversarial career, right? Like we are protecting against threats. Those threats might change a little bit per industry. Like if you work in crypto, you're probably going to have a lot more people targeting you for financial reasons, and there's going to be certain groups that are motivated for that. In SaaS, it tends to be a lot of similar threats, and so I think that I don't want to cop out and say like there's nothing unique, but I think that like I don't think design is any different to any other SaaS tool. So like it's no different to Salesforce, no different to Slack. Like we hold user generated content. In our case, that content is user designs for the most part. And in Salesforce, it's PII information, et cetera, et cetera. But I think there is one unique challenge that we've had at Canva, which is print. So like the more physical. So this is like a feature a lot of people don't know about, which is you can take your designs, you can print them out. You can print them out on T-shirts, business cards, thousands of flyers if you want, all of that kind of stuff. And there's some really interesting sort of scenarios on like how do you protect that data. Sometimes we have to use third-party providers to print stuff out in different countries. And so that's like, again, it's like one of those like edge cases, which not a lot of people have to deal with. And so because it's not something that's well trodden, you have to do a lot of investigation yourself, I think.
I see. So it's more around data protection when it comes to printing. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So again, not too dissimilar to protecting user designs, but if someone's printing something out, it's probably not the most secure thing in the world, but in some cases it might be, right? And so you need to kind of treat it all the same, put that same level of protection that we would with designs as well.
Yeah, that's very interesting use case, because even though you were elaborating on SaaS being more or less having similar challenges, do you think a lot of it also depends on the scale of organization? So whenever you were drawing comparison, let's say with Salesforce, it's also a lot about scale, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's often the case of like, who are your customers and what are they storing in there, right? Like the reality is that AWS is a great example. Like AWS need to care huge amounts about security. They need to invest tons into security because it stores absolutely everything for millions of companies around the world, right? Yeah. So you have both the scale and the fact it's supporting everything. For us, we're primarily storing user designs for marketing, presentations, that kind of stuff. Definitely still same bar of security that we need to meet, but it is a case where, like you say, the scale is just massively different.
Do you think, because whenever I think of Canva, right, it is such a creative space that everyone operates in, and I assume that it requires a lot of people in marketing. Do you find people that work in these fields tend to be more targeted versus more technical people? Because whenever you think of traditional organization, you just think like, okay, what is the easiest way in? And unfortunately, it frequently happens to be marketing, just because we tend to be all over the place.
Yeah, definitely somewhat. Like it's funny. You will find, like, if you go back and you look at all of the sort of SaaS attacks on SaaS companies over the last year or two, you will probably find that not many of them are through engineers. And if they are, it's probably an engineer accidentally posting an API key to GitHub or something and an attacker using that. You'll find that a lot of the like direct targeted attacks are on marketing, as you say, sales. And we've had obviously tons of that over the last few months with Salesforce, having their plugin breached via SalesLoft, and customer support, and even customer support going back. There's been tons of examples over the last few years. I think Robinhood and a few of the others are all ones that have been targeted through their customer support portal. So it tends to be that your non-technical audience are riskier, and so you generally want to put maybe more stringent controls, but you don't want to slow them down. So it's definitely a case of, a case of balance, I think.
Yeah. It's always a question: how do you ensure security without slowing down productivity? And with the fact that Canva exists as a web app, which is accessed via browser, what are some of your browser security concerns?
Yeah, it's funny. I think like the biggest threat most companies face, especially in SaaS land at the moment, are stealer malware. So malware that steals passwords, cookies, etc. So usually it runs and it gets all your stuff in the browser, and it takes everything and sends it back to someone who can then reuse it. And there's really easy ways to start fixing some of this stuff, and it's starting to come out now, but it's slow to adopt. So Google have started something called DBSC, which is device-bound session credentials. Definitely a bit of a mouthful. And the idea is that, sort of long story short, you can say that like this session in my browser should only be usable from my device. Like it shouldn't be usable from another device. So if someone takes my cookie and uses it elsewhere, nothing should happen. Adoption is slow and it's difficult. It's one of those cases where you need to enable it in your enterprise browser. You need the tool, like the SaaS tool, like Canva, Slack, Salesforce, etc., to support it. And it's probably going to take a long time for it to become pretty popular. There are ways that you can do this as an enterprise in your company. You can do something called file access authorization, which is where you basically say this cookie here should only be accessible by Chrome, nobody else. And that helps with a lot of it, but it's not perfect by any means either. So I think that like there's a couple of things that we're starting to see where you can start to protect against this threat. But I think a lot of the things that we do in security are things that take several years. Like when you look at single sign-on, right? Single sign-on probably took 10 years to become like ubiquitous. And we still don't have single sign-out everywhere. That's still only there in like 10, 20%. So I think it's a case where that's my biggest concern. I'm starting to see it get fixed at like an industry level, but it's still going to take probably a lot of time for us to get there.
Yeah. I think, I guess the main question is how fast is the user adoption? Because at the end of the day, exactly the same thing that we just talked about 5 minutes ago is how do you make the process as seamless as possible for the end user, but at the same time insert all of these security controls. And when it comes to, let's say, AI-powered threat, is that something that you think companies similar to Canva already know how to respond to? Because I feel like every week you wake up, something new comes up. And how do you, from your perspective, stay aligned with this constant stream of threats, just, I don't know, waking you up with a new set of news?
Yeah, I think even with all this stuff with AI, a lot of it is just automating tasks that humans did before. So a lot of the risks are the same when you boil it down. Like the impact at the end of the day is the same thing. It's like stolen sessions, data gets lost, things get posted on the internet, et cetera, et cetera. And so the solutions that you fix AI or you help secure AI might be different, but like you can still talk about the generic risks the same. I think the problem we face is then like fragmentation on like we have controls for humans over here and controls for services over here. It gets confusing, it's hard to manage multiple things, that kind of stuff. I think the best advice I've got on securing AI so far is it was a great blog post. I I can't remember the title of it off the top of my head, but sort of the long and short of it is like boiling it down. You can look at 3 points when it comes to AI. You can look at, does it have access to your internal data? Does it have internet access? And does it have access to tools? And if it has all three, it's probably a matter of time until you get breached, not not if. And so I think a lot of people in the industry are coming up more and more cases where things want to get automated, and we're starting to get to 2 of 3, and people want to add the third, and security teams are mostly just saying no at the moment. But I think that over time, we build out controls, we deal with new technologies and stuff, and we'll get there eventually.
Yeah. And what sort of approach do you adopt when it comes to using AI within enterprise? Because whenever I open Canva, I feel like there's always like a new AI cool tool that comes out that I just can't wait to try.
Yeah, it's a great question. There's 2 things that I tend to use a little bit. I use our image generation quite a lot. So always good for designs and stuff. So I'm a big fan of the Canva image generator. Other than that, on sort of like a more internal aspect, I like MCP. I'm using it a little bit, but I wouldn't say I'm a heavy user. It's one of those things that I think has potential, but maybe needs a little bit of work. But there are some great use cases internally where you've got data in multiple places. Rather than going to all of those multiple places, you can just, ask it to grab me all those things, get it all back in a nice consumable format. So there's definitely some use cases, but I find in security, we spend more time looking at the technology and securing it rather than using it sometimes,
Yeah, makes sense. Are you excited about the AI browsers that just coming out?
I'm cautious, and I think everyone probably is in security. I think it's been a case where sort of Chromium has dominated browsers for a long time, and some people will hate that. Some people will love it. I think from a centralization and security perspective, it's good on average. But don't get me wrong, there's problems. Ads and stuff are painful. Malicious ads, really painful. So I don't know if I can say I'm excited. Cautiously optimistic, perhaps.
Yeah, makes sense. I think this is the case for most of the heads of security that I spoke to, because you're excited about the tech, but you cannot be overly too excited if you don't have, if the security side is not ready to respond to all the potential threats that are coming in. So it's a bit of who's gonna come first problem.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm just curious, what is like one of the most sophisticated attacks that you've seen out there, or the ones that people haven't seen, but you paid a close attention to and thought, okay, people should really look into this?
I think I've got 2 answers to this one. The first and kind of quick one is that I mentioned earlier that sales, marketing, support tend to be the targets for attack. I think we've seen support get attacked a lot. Things like Zendesk, Jira, etc. We're starting to see sales get targeted more and more. Things like Salesforce, etc. I don't see the same with marketing tools as much. Tools like Braze and stuff like that. It tends to be that attackers kind of pick a spot and then they stay there for a while until it gets secured and then they move on to something new. So I wouldn't be surprised to see things like social media management tools, email marketing tools, that kind of stuff be like further down the line in these attackers' sort of MO. And I said, like, what's the most interesting? My friends I speak to in crypto, they do. It feels like when you talk to people in crypto, they're more secure than banks sometimes, especially some of these SaaS companies, because they just see the threats every day. Like, it's constant. It's not a case of some SaaS companies where, they might get attacked every few years. It's a case of like, it is every week, which is like a very different environment to be in,
Yeah. I've also, whenever I've spoken to anyone from crypto, one interesting thing that I discovered, because there is no like real centralized body that like always there to protect you. Versus traditional banks, they have such a tight ecosystem among security leaders, because they're like, okay, if this is something happens, this is the way we do. So it's like a way tighter community versus any other industry. So it's always
You can't just be like, insurance will handle that. It's okay. We've lost your money. We can't get it back. We're sorry.
yeah, yeah, exactly. It's a very creative space for security leaders to play in. And I was also actually reading your LinkedIn posts around acquisitions. I know that throughout your career, you helped out with quite a few acquisitions. And you mentioned that most of them failed due to poor integration, not clear data boundaries. Maybe could you unpack this a little and share any learnings from that experience?
Yeah, there's some like Harvard study from some years ago, which basically says that like 70 to 90% of acquisitions fail. So they never recoup the money that was spent on them in the first place. That feels probably right to me, to be honest, but at like a gut feel level. And I think that security and IT teams often do not help, because often what will happen is that a tool will get acquired, and then the big acquiring company will say, adopt all our processes, adopt all our tools. And that will probably take years, quite honestly. Like if you're going to adopt corporate and product tooling and everything, easily years worth of work. You could sometimes be starting from scratch. Sometimes you're lucky enough to acquire a company with a similar tech stack to you, and that time is drastically reduced, but generally not. And so I generally recommend that like security should work really early on in the due diligence process, and they should work with the engineering team, presumably doing acquisition, to think about it from like a timelines and risk perspective. So, you know, there's some really obvious ones, like if you use AWS, they use Azure, you've now got a new cloud to secure, or you need to move them in, and that's going to have big trade-offs. I think tooling today helps. You've got browser security companies, you've got tools like Wiz where you can connect them up to multiple things. But it's not perfect, and they're not everywhere. So I definitely think it's a case where you as security and IT need to work with your acquiring teams to build like a strategy around how acquisitions will work. And I think probably the most important piece of advice I have is that company leaders aren't going to understand risk. They're not going to understand if something's high risk, low risk, medium risk. What does that mean? I think you've got to put it in something tangible, which is, how long is this going to take? Like, what is the time to value? So that's generally something I recommend for anyone involved in that process.
Yeah. Do you typically see security teams being involved in this due diligence process, or is it still not that common scenario?
It's getting more and more. People tend to want to keep the numbers low because it's like a private thing. You don't like getting out and all of this, but definitely include security teams. Like, it's probably security people watching this. So I think rather than preaching to the choir, what I would say is go and speak to your corp dev team if you have one. If you're at a big company, they're the people who will be doing acquisitions and stuff. Make good friends with them. Get into the process nice and early. If you're not at a big company, it's probably one of your founders, COO normally, but could be anyone.
Yeah. Does it also expose any potential new risks during this acquisition process as you're migrating, let's say, from one set of security stack to another?
Yeah, it's going to have downstream impact on not just security, but other teams as well. Like thinking about it from like a browser perspective, for example, like maybe you're all in on enterprise Chrome. Maybe you acquire a company that uses Firefox as their primary browser. You've either then got to choose to unify or secure two things, right? And so you need to make sure that if the answer is secure two things, that you have the resources, that cost is factored into the due diligence as early on as possible. So yeah, that's kind of my recommendation.
Yeah, I think this is so important to take into consideration because, today everyone talks about how heads of security have to be speaking on a business level. And sometimes it's only like attachment to revenue. But when a company is going through the acquisition process, this is really when, once again, the security team has to be brought in just to give the right estimation of how exactly the process will go, how long it will take. So all of these things have to be taken into account. But shifting gears to your past, you rolled out YubiKeys and WebAuthn at Atlassian back in 2018, way before most had heard of hardware authentication. That's very persistent indeed. Walk me through your thought process. How do you know when to be an early adopter, whether it's YubiKeys or whatever technology you're looking at today?
Yeah, definitely it's a case where you need to understand the industry you're in a way. Mm-hmm. So you need to understand, like I said, like what vertical are you in? So are you in healthcare? Mm-hmm. Are you in banking? And then you need to understand, like, what threats are you going to personally be facing? And there are some cases where just being slightly better than the competition is going to pay off like massive dividends for you. The best part about this is that there's so much security research done by different companies. Like, I think the big one is the Verizon DBIR report. Mm-hmm. There's a great graph in that from this year's one where essentially credential stuffing and session theft and all that kind of stuff is going down. And it's going down, probably because of stronger authentication, more MFA, all of that kind of stuff. Like, all of that has slowly been like gaining traction and it's been affecting us that way. But when you look at it, you see the number of vulnerabilities that are causing breaches is going up and up and up. So if you looked a few years ago, you looked at like actual breaches in real life, how many of them were caused by vulns in infrastructure and stuff. They were there, don't get me wrong. Like, they happened, but they didn't happen super often. And I think that at the moment, we're just seeing so much. Like, you don't even have to look back even a few weeks, and there will just be like so many different NPM package takeovers and all sorts of things. So I think that you need to identify these trends early on. You need to kind of look at the data, and then you need to bring in sort of your CTI that you are doing to help do that. And so I think through a combination of these, you can kind of make a fairly good judgment of what are the attacks that are most likely going to happen here based on my infrastructure, my company, my security awareness, that kind of stuff. So I think that on average, if you're doing well in identity, the next thing is probably nailing down vuln management and packages and all that kind of stuff. If you're doing well there, then it's going to be something else. And so I think like you're always moving the bar, but always look at where attackers are hitting. One last example, I talked about the sales loft drift breach. Like, something that we did quite some time ago was go look at all of our Salesforce integrations, make sure that we've turned off any old ones, make sure that we've secured the ones that we have. And so when that happened, we sort of, it was one of those cases where at least we kind of knew what was going on and that kind of thing. It's much better being in that position than it just being the Wild West, right? And like having no idea what you've got installed, no idea if you're affected, all that kind of stuff. So it's definitely a case of a little bit of guessing almost, but you can make some pretty accurate guesses based on the data that's available.
Interesting. So that's very proactive approach from the perspective of that you look at sort of the direction where attackers are moving and then build your estimate around it and in a way respond with appropriate security measure. So what's the latest report that you read? How in a way it influenced the way you approach security? I'm just thinking, what was the latest eye-opener to you that you thought, okay, this needs to be changed?
Yeah, great question. So a lot of focus on vulnerabilities as a whole today tends to be on code. So it tends to be like packages that you're importing into your code. It tends to be on your infrastructure. So, the stuff you're hosting. And it tends to be on binaries installed on your laptop. So your Zoom, your Spotify, that kind of stuff. I feel like a gap that a lot of companies have is packages that aren't on their infrastructure. So like you might import some packages and download them onto your laptop to do some local development. In those cases, a lot of the MDM tools and EDR tools don't really pick them up. They don't do an awful lot of good scanning. It's one of the cases where if you had to find a package, see who on your fleet has it, and then delete it or revoke it or something, could you do that? And I think a lot of the tooling, the answer is no today. And I think there's a few examples of vendors like starting to get into this area. But again, it's one of those cases where you almost want the same tool for your product stuff and the same tool for your endpoints. You kind of don't want to, but we'll get there eventually. But that's one area I've been thinking about a lot lately and talking to people about.
Yeah, I'm sure quite a few people looked into this space too. And I mean, once you said that, they're also like, if I'm not the only one that's looked into this, I need to pay close attention to. But I also want to talk more from the leadership perspective. With your experience of scaling teams, what's your playbook for creating a healthy team culture, especially when giving engineers autonomy and not compromising security?
Yeah, essentially with this one, I like to think of sort of security culture as a bit of a triangle. And I think of it as security on one end, culture on one end, and velocity on the other end. And I like to split out culture and velocity because they're not always interlinked, if that makes sense. Like if you worked at a startup where you all play video games on your laptop on a Friday or something, that's not doing anything for velocity, but it might be doing something for culture, right? Like coming together, building your team, that kind of stuff. And I like to think of it as where should you be in that triangle relative to your peers and your founders and like their expectations for the company. And the biggest issue I see is that security people naturally want to draw the needle to security because that's their job. Yeah. That is why they're paid. But it's not the be all and end all, right? And so I think that it shouldn't be about always pulling it towards security. It should be about balance and getting it where it needs to go. Because there's acceptable risk and there's company culture and all of that stuff that you need to factor into.
Yeah. How did you respond to this from your perspective? How did you make sure that your team doesn't pull too much towards security?
Actually, great question. Like we worked on passwordless, I think, end of last year. So we worked on a project that was entirely user experience focused. It wasn't anything to do with security. Yeah. And I like to see it as like if you release a crappy product, people have to use it in security, which I hate. Like you should still want to strive to build a nice to use product at the end of the day. And so I think that don't just think about risks, like balance risks with user experience in your planning. If you make the user experience 10 times better, you can probably then make it 5 times worse with a bunch of security implementations that you want to implement because you've made it that much better. So now you've got so much leeway to make it just a tiny bit worse for those really impactful projects that you want to implement rather than constantly fighting with developers.
Interesting. Some make it a lot better and some in other flip side a little bit worse.
I'm sure this will be used against me in the future, but yeah.
Well, all your team that will be listening to the podcast at the end will be like, okay. We'll pay back. And you're also no stranger speaking at events, podcasts. What security truth do you share on these public platforms that makes audiences a bit uncomfortable, except for the one that you just mentioned earlier?
That's the one we don't speak about, but isn't spicy. I think that's a well-known thing, at least. This is one where I'll admit I don't practice what I preach as much as I should do. I'm a big fan of transparency and security, and I think to shout out a really great company that did some good work here, GitLab used to publish all of their internal security metrics, amount of vulnerabilities, patch times, all of that. I don't think they do as much these days. I think they've had to, bring bits and pieces down and perception and stuff like that. But I think it was a really cool idea that I wish caught on more, because security is a bit of a silver bullet, right? Like you don't really ever know how good someone's security is, and security perception and actual security can actually be widely far apart from each other. And so the only way we can sort of negate that is by being more transparent, publishing more of our metrics, that kind of stuff. But it's scary, and there's not really any business benefit to doing so if you're the only one doing it. So I'm not sure it'll catch on, to be honest with you. It certainly hasn't from the people who have tried to do it. But again, it's still something that I'd like to see more of.
Yeah, I think at least right now there are more communities and circles where heads of security can engage with each other, and platforms like this one, it is created for people that are looking to enter into the space and looking to scale. So I know that while a lot of pieces of information cannot be shared publicly, but at the same time, they still give the directional thought process that in the long term can be quite beneficial and quite helpful. And at the end of the day, there is this new powerful tool called LinkedIn that allows people to get in touch and honestly making this community a little bit more friendlier, open, and perhaps sharing some metrics, at least confidentially.
Yeah. It's one of those cases where I think I would love to just have something I can point people at sometimes, especially people new in the industry. They don't always have those connections. Especially for me, I found that super difficult when I first started getting in. But you get there over time. I just think it can be easier. It's like going back to the user experience thing, right? Like every time you buy a tool, you have to request access to a vendor portal, get a password, talk to a support engineer, go download a SOC 2 report. Like probably could just be public, but more people are doing that these days. So I think we're getting there.
Yeah, bit by bit. And looking at your journey from forensics to enterprise security leadership, what advice would you give someone trying to make that same leap today?
Yeah, going from the government to tech was like a big change. And I think that I know people who have tried and failed, often because going back to our previous point, they don't always nail in the culture and get that locked down.
Yeah.
I think that the thing is, it's a bit like some bizarro world. Like everything is the same and everything is different. Like I have a friend who works at like an investment company, very much Microsoft, very enterprise stack, versus me working at like a bit more of a startup, AWS, more cloud tech. And we can talk to each other. We're doing the same things. We can understand each other. Sometimes I just don't understand what he's saying. And I think that's very much. It's the case of like, I think the culture bit is the very different bit. Like he was saying how they had just implemented some new sort of cloud access gateway thing where like they're monitoring all the traffic. They can see what screenshots are people taking, all of this kind of stuff. And it's fine, but it comes with those culture and velocity trade-offs, right? If someone has to request every network firewall port that they want unblocked, and that's what we used to have to do in the government, it's very different. And so I find that, again, they don't always take on the nuance of those trade-offs, but they are often smaller teams. And so the problem is that it takes more effort to build this stuff out to be nice. And if you don't have those resources, then you can't really do it in the first place.
Yeah. Do you think certain security leaders are built for more startup ecosystem versus more formal ecosystem. I'm just thinking, how much does the character play the role? What kind of security can you do at the end?
Yeah, I think it is, right. Like you get entrenched in what you do. And I know people who will go into a company and they'll purchase one big security platform, your Zscaler or your Palos or whatever of the world, and they'll just spend tens and tens of millions of dollars on all of the different SKUs, roll that out everywhere, off you go. And then they'll just do that at every company they go to. Same thing every time. And I think that kind of misses some of the nuance of maybe that's not the right thing for this company. Maybe there are better ways of doing it. And so I think it does depend on the person, but you can always change if you're willing,
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you probably be the best person to explain all of these transitions, because going from government to such a creative industry, you would assume it's two different people. But sometimes so many qualities are combined within the same person. So you can't overgeneralize it. So, yeah.
It's like I'd never knock someone down who was applying for a role based on their previous experience, but it's how they show up in the interview. And I think that someone might have to, they can't rely on their previous experience. So they have to kind of say a little bit more how they would do something rather than how they have done something. So it's all a bit of balance.
Makes sense. And okay, we have this tradition on our podcast where our last guest would ask a question to the next guest. So our last guest asked the following question to you. Since cybersecurity is not just the responsibility of the security team, what strategies do you use to help non-technical teams strengthen their cybersecurity knowledge and awareness?
Yeah, great question. I think I got two answers to this. One is that I'm actually a big fan of people not knowing security if they don't need to. And I think there's always that caveat there. I think Jason Chan, in one of his articles, I think it was High Velocity Security Engineering, had a great point of you don't hire developers to work on security stuff. You hire developers to develop products. I want them building products. I don't want them doing security. And so it's a case of, when I think of doing comms, right, I'm not going to do comms to the entire company for one little change that affects one person. I'm going to do targeted comms to just the right amount and do just the required amount. And I think the same applies to security awareness. You might have your yearly security training that you actually just want people to get through as quick as possible, because no one probably cares anyway. So you cover off the basic points and you get them there, and then you do it. And then for those high risk groups, you then start building partnerships. You start working with them to get it into their roadmaps, and you do targeted training that's more relevant to their day-to-day, that's going to actually be interesting to the job they do. And so I think it's a case where only do the required amount and then tailor that to the individuals, because it's going to work way better than trying some generic catch-all training,
Yeah, you have to be, I think today more than ever, you have to be so adaptable. Whether we are talking about security or business in general, the best companies are the ones that are the most agile. So similarly, from the security perspective, you want to, how you said, be able to be tailored enough whoever you're speaking to. So this is really great tip. What question would you like to ask to our next guest?
Yeah, you warned me about this one, so I did have a think. And so I think, putting the question simply, what's one area of security that you think can be improved hugely, by a big amount? And what's one area you think's kind of hitting the limit? I think some areas, you get diminishing returns after a certain amount of time, right? So I think that's an interesting question to ask. Maybe they'll say, vulnerability management, that's got loads of improvement, but identity and access, we can't really do anything there. Probably the best it's going to get,
Yeah, I'll make sure whenever I find out what's the answer to this one, I'll pass the answer from that guest. Okay, it was such a fun conversation. I love learning your journey, how you got into this space. You're the first person that I speak to that comes from the forensics background, and that made so many leaps throughout your career, whether it's geography, whether it's role, or the kind of structure and industry you're working in. It's just very interesting to see how all of these experiences shape person that I'm sitting in front of today and the way he approaches security. I think the main takeaway for me is user experience at the end of the day is so important. And while there are so many threats that are coming out these days, you have to make sure that productivity doesn't go down as you adopt so many measures, whether it's day-to-day activities, acquisitions, or anything like this. Has to be at the forefront. So that's my personal takeaway.
Perfect. It's been great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Kane. Thank you.